Greetings, guys. Greetings, peace. Greetings to the gods, strength and powers. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're continuing Encyclopedia Britannica. We're continuing from trusts. Alright, trust. In economics, the word trust, as used here, includes all those aggregations of capital engaged in productive industry that, by virtue of their industrial strength, have or are supposed to have some monopolistic power. Legal monopolies, as such, and natural monopolies are excluded, although it is frequently true that the trusts are aided by and sometimes control natural monopolies. Trusts are here considered to be identical with the so-called capitalistic monopolies. As trusts started in America, the subject will be considered here first from the point of view of American experience. So while it is probably true that trusts are a product of evolution, it is desirable to analyze and explain that conception in some detail if we are to understand their industrial significance. Competition, especially among industries managed on a great scale, often makes modern business unprofitable. Commercial men have been thus compelled in some way to modify former methods of doing business. So long as most industries were run on a small scale, the differences in the ability and the facilities of the various competitors were so great that only those at the lower end of the scale of excellence were forced out of the business. This to the general advantage of industrial society. The great mass of producers remain vigorously competing with one another, some making larger, others smaller profits, but all except a few at the lower margin making at least a living. Under modern business conditions, competitors are often, relatively speaking, few in number, of substantially equal ability and controlling substantially equal facilities for managing the business economically. Consequently, in such circumstances, modern competitors differs greatly from that form which was familiar to the earlier economists. Among competitors of such great resources, the struggle may last long after the business has become unprofitable to all before any will fail. Among competitors so nearly equal in strength, the entire industry may be very seriously injured by competition before enough are forced out to effect materially the severity of the competition. The dictum of Stevenson that where combination is possible, competition is impossible has a much wider application now than in the early days of railways. The modern facilities for the transportation of goods, for the rapid transmission of intelligence by fast mail, and especially for the instantaneous exchange of information by the telegraph and telephone, have made it possible to manage easily a large business, however widely separated its different plants or establishments may be. In the middle of the 19th century, or thereabouts, on account of the lack of these facilities, management of such institutions would often have been impossible. Many of the advantages of combinations are entirely dependent upon these modern facilities, and on that account, these facilities may be said to be an occasion, if not a cause, of the trusts. Alright, so we're on to two kinds of trust industries. If the product of an industry is of such a nature that its quality is substantially uniform and can be readily tested by purchasers, especially if the goods are such that they are ordinarily sold in large quantities, the competition between rival establishments must almost of necessity be a competition in price. Sugar refining, oil refining, the distilling of spirits, the manufacture of salt are such industries. The standard quality is readily tested, and the manufacturer who can offer the standard product at the lowest price effects a sale. Industries manufacturing comparatively inexpensive articles for the retail trade put them up in packages which become well known to customers. And those industries whose goods are sold under brands or trademarks or in some other form so that they are familiar to buyers afford an example of competition of an entirely different kind. When the reputation of a certain brand of goods of this nature becomes established, consumers make no further effort to test its quality, and the retail price often becomes a customary price. If a manufacturer of such goods finds his trade injured by a rival, his most effective means of competition will often be not a lowering of the price, but an increase of the outlay on advertising. Soap, baking powder, photographic cameras for general use, and of late years certain brands of coffee, patent medicine, and other drugs of similar nature are examples of this class. Those industries in which the competition becomes a matter of cutting of prices can be combination remove rivals from the field. Sorry, can by combination remove rivals from the field and then put prices up to a remunerative rate. Competitors in industries of the second class by combination can save many of the costs of selling and thus without any increase in the price of the product may save enough of the cost to make the business profitable. So that was two kinds of trust industries. Alright? So now we're going on to savings from combination. Some of the advantages of combination over competition which have led to the organization of trust may be enumerated. 1. The cost of selling may be greatly lessened as has been intimated. Competition in the case of industries of the second class named above leads to very expensive advertising in order to effect sales. An examination of the pages of any of the American magazines with a thought as to the amount charged for the use of these advertising pages, from $100 to as high as even $400, or from £20 to £80 per page for a single insertion in some of the magazines with the largest circulation, will convince one of the cost of such competitive advertising. The expense involved in making attractive show windows in stores or shops and in calling the attention of the public to popular wares by posters scattered about the country and by legends painted on rocks on buildings along the lines of railways, etc., and other common examples. 2. The salaries of commercial travelers together with their hotel and traveling expenses are of a similar nature. This competitive advertising in many cases does not increase to any noteworthy extent the consumption of the products in question, but merely attracts customers from one manufacturer to another. Combination among establishments that do this costly advertising saves a large part of the expense without lessening materially the quantity of goods sold. 3. If different manufacturing establishments scattered throughout the country are brought under one management, it will be possible for orders for goods to be received at one central office and then to be distributed to the federated establishment so that goods can be dispatched to customers in each case from the nearest establishment. In this way, freight expenses may be very greatly lessened, cross freights over the same territory being substantially eliminated. A single establishment supplying all of its customers would often be compelled to deliver much larger distances at greatly increased expense. 4. The entire profit of an establishment frequently depends upon the skill of the manager. When many different establishments are organized into one, it is possible to select the most skillful manager of all and to put him in charge of the combination, thus securing in many cases, if the trust includes practically all of the establishments in the entire industry, the ablest manager in the country for them all. It is of course true that as an establishment increases in size, or as a combination increases the number of its branches, especially if they are widely scattered, it becomes impossible for the manager to give his personal supervision to the details of management of each institution. An executive officer of the highest skill, however, will so select his subordinates, so direct their work, and so infuse into them his own spirit, that under careful inspection, comparatively little will be lost from his inability to be present personally in each separate establishment. In the larger combinations, frequent reports, often daily, are made from each concern, giving in detail the quantity of the output, the quality of the goods, the exact cost of the different processes of manufacture, so that it is possible to compare continually each of them with all of the others, to detect the special weakness of each, and in this way to remedy any slight defects in any one establishment, and to bring all nearly up to the highest level of productive capacity. 5. Each business manager is likely to have some special excellence in his methods of management. One will be particularly skillful in the technique of manufacturing, another in the organization of the business, a third in selling goods, and so on. By combining many establishments into one, it is possible so to distribute this managerial skill that each superintendent will be given the department for which he is peculiarly fitted, and the whole establishment will thus get the benefit not merely of the best executive ability at the head, but also of the best managing skill at the head of each separate department. In many cases, it is probable that as much is saved in this way as in any other. 6. Besides this distribution of skill of the managers, it is sometimes equally beneficial to distribute the various products of the combination among the different plants. For example, in the manufacture of hoop and bar iron, the products are turned out in great varieties of size, probably from 75 to 100. Wholesale dealers, in sending their orders to the mills, are likely to call for from 10 to 50 different kinds. If these orders go to an establishment which has but one large mill, it may be necessary, in order to execute the order, to change the rules in the mill several times, causing thus a waste of power, of time and energy. If several establishments are combined, each can be equipped for certain sizes. When in these circumstances a large order is received, to each establishment will be sent that part of the order which it is especially equipped to fulfill. And thus, without any changes of rules or stoppage of machinery, the separate sizes can be made. The same principle holds, of course, in nearly all lines of work, in some of the greater degree than in others. But in the manufacture of hoop and bar iron, a saving from this source amounting to from $1 to $1.50, or from 4 shilling to 6 shilling per ton, is sometimes made. 7. The advantage of unifying in one establishment the manufacture of products somewhat allied in nature appears also in selling goods. If customers can buy all of the various kinds of related goods in one establishment, much of their time and energy will be saved. Some of the larger combinations, therefore, in order to make this saving for their customer and thus to be sure of retaining their orders, add to their plant facilities for making products which a smaller establishment could hardly manufacture. For example, the Distilling Company of America, which controls probably 90% of the entire product of corn spirits, found it to its advantage to add to its plant several rye distilleries and to purchase a number of the leading brands of whiskies for consumption as beverages in order that they might supply the needs along different lines of practically all dealers in spirits and whiskies. In this way, saving for themselves many customers who otherwise might have been lost. 8. The mere size of an establishment and its ability to supply at any time on short notice any order, however large, gives it also an advantage in retaining custom. A concern that controls only from 5 to 10% of the entire output of a country in any special line of goods might at times find it impossible to supply goods promptly. Large customers who might thus be embarrassed are more ready to deal regularly with an establishment controlling 75 to 90% of the output, if they can in this way be sure of having their orders attended to promptly. It is stated that the American Sugar Refining Company, on this account, has been able to secure with considerable regularity 1/16 of a cent a pound more on its refined sugar than the independent refiners, the latter being frequently compelled to cut their prices to that extent in order to make sales. 9. Owing to the fact that the introduction of goods into new markets, especially into foreign markets, is a matter of time, expenditure of energy, and of money, the larger establishment with great capital has in this particular also a decided advantage. The Standard Oil Company, an American Tobacco Company, and other similar establishments have thus been able to open up new markets in Europe, in Japan, China, and other portions of the Far East more readily by far than individual producers along those lines could have done. This stimulus to the foreign trade acts also beneficially to the domestic trade, inasmuch as the exportation of part of the product tends to keep prices somewhat higher at home, and as the added demand for the raw material influences its price, thus creating demand for labor along many lines. 10. The combination also frequently saves for its stockholders considerable sums from its wiser dealing with credits, and this in a way also that is beneficial to the entire business community. When competition is very severe among different establishments, the managers, in order to increase their sales, will not infrequently grant credit somewhat unwisely. The combination controlling a large part of the market is not so tempted, and moreover has the power to bring needed pressure to bear upon delinquent debtors more readily, so that losses from bad debts are much less frequent. Besides the special savings that serve as reasons for the formation of combinations, certain special favors at times lead to their formation. So we on to special favors to combinations. So what is explaining and talking about here is how they started using combinations to monopolize trade and investment and sales of products in America, right? So they're telling us on the basis of how the combination was used to merge different organizations together to do business, all right? So we want to special favors to combinations. So 1. The protective tariff is most frequently cited as such a favor. By the protection which a protective duty gives against foreign competition, it doubtless often furnishes the occasion for the formation of trusts. If a large amount of capital is tempted into the industry through the profits promised by the tariff, and therefore competition among the various establishments becomes fierce, it is much easier for them to form a combination with the certainty of good profits, provided the domestic competition can be overcome, if they are certain that foreign competition also is to be excluded. On the other hand, it would hardly be right to speak of the tariff as in this case the direct cause. In other industries not protected by the tariff, the same fierce competition leads to the formation of combinations. The tariff is simply an encouraging condition. The removal of the tariff would now destroy the combination unless it destroyed the industry at the same time. But on the other hand, the removal of a protective tariff might very easily prevent the abuses of exorbitant prices which might be exacted by a combination protected by the tariff. 2. It is doubtless true that combinations have a good many times been encouraged by special discriminated rates of freight granted by the railways or other transportation agencies. There is, of course, a certain economic advantage to the railways in having goods dispatched in large quantities by consignors who are able to supply their own cars, loading and unloading facilities, etc. Railways, on that account, often prefer to deal with large firms, and other things being equal, are willing to give them some special rates. These concerns also are likely to have rather better credit than the smaller ones, so that dealing with them ensures prompt pay and cheaper collection of accounts. The competition among the different railways also for the freights which as an important customer can furnish leads to cutting of the rates in their favor. These special rates, however, whether justified from the business point of view or not, are beyond any question from the social point of view, often a very grave injury. A manufacturer who receives these special favors can build up a business substantially monopolistic in its extent, whereas his rival of equal or even of greater ability and equally skillful as a manufacturer would be ruined if he did not receive like rates. The injustice of such discriminations and their evil effects on the community have been recognized by legislatures and courts in America, and they are practically universally forbidden. It remains beyond question true that they are, notwithstanding, very frequently granted. In recent years, so we're on to promotion now. In recent years in the United States, there can be little question that the formation of the Great Combination has been much encouraged by the opportunities which promoters were able to seize of making for themselves large profits. The movement towards combinations was so fully recognized and the advantages in many cases so palpable that a well-informed and skillful promoter was often able to persuade a large proportion of the manufacturers in some special industry to combine. In preparing the plan for such combination, the promoter has in many cases seen to it that he himself first bought the properties which he could very shortly turn over to the combination at high rates of profit, or else he has been able to persuade the new corporation to issue large amounts of stock, of which considerable proportions were given to him in return for his services. It has been true in many cases that these securities have been speculative in nature, but nevertheless the promoter has often reaped in this way large rewards. The possibility of this profit has doubtless stimulated his activity in urging the combinations. So we're on to the underwriter. Associated with the promoter in the organization of these combinations have usually been bankers or other financiers who stood ready for an amount of stock or other promised profit sufficiently large to compensate them for their risk to furnish to the combinations cash sufficient to start the business and to promote other needed capital. Usually the form of underwriting employed has been this. A promoter engaged in the formation of a combination and needing a certain fixed sum in cash would make an arrangement with a bank to sell to it at a price agreed upon such proportions of a named amount of stock as were not disposed of to other customers before a certain fixed date. For example, the bank might agree to furnish $1 million in cash, £200,000 in return for say 4 millions of stock, £800,000, or to purchase itself at a fixed price all the remainder of the 4 million stock unsold at the date agreed upon, the bank itself to become the sales agent. In those circumstances, the bank would naturally use its best endeavors to sell the 4 millions of stock to other customers at the price agreed upon, say $25 or $5 per share. So far as it failed of disposing of the entire amount, it would take the remainder itself For taking these risks, naturally, the bank has almost invariably asked a very high commission, and not frequently it has been asserted that the managers of the bank have been given a special bonus for themselves privately, in addition to the rates of profits granted the bank. These large amounts of stock that are paid to the promoter and the financier for the purpose of bringing about the organization of a large trust lead, of course, to what is called overcapitalization. Now, this is the basis of capitalization. What the proper basis of capitalization for a manufacturing industry should be is a matter that cannot perhaps easily be determined by a definite principle which shall be applicable in every case. The laws that have been most strict on the subject attempt to limit the capitalization to the actual cash value of the business, by that being understood at times simply the cost of the plant itself with the running cash capital needed. On the other hand, most businessmen think that it is a wiser plan, and on the whole equally just, to capitalize a business on the basis of its earning capacity, regardless of what the plant may have cost. When, as has been frequently the case of late years, in addition to this cash value of the plant and the cash itself, which may have been paid in, large sums of stock are issued also for properties which may be in themselves highly overvalued, and for the services of the promoter, the financier, and others, we can see that the capitalization must be far above what may ordinarily be considered a paying basis. On the other hand, if the element of monopoly enters into the business to any noteworthy extent, the prices of the product may be kept so high that fair dividends may be paid even on this high capitalization. That the tendency towards increasing the capital has been very strong, there can be no question, and a penalty is apt to be paid for this somewhat reckless financiering. As soon as a slight depression in business comes, so that it is perfectly evident not merely that dividends cannot be paid on the common stock, but that in all probability both the deferred stock and the bonds, if any, have been issued, will also have to go without interest. It may be necessary to recognize many of these combinations and to start them anew on a much lower capitalization. Alright? So we're going to stop there. We're going to take it from the industrial manager on the next round. So now you see they start showing us how in America they started using combinations where they were monopolizing industry, right? And it was creating a capitalist society where they could set prices very high without competition, and because they had no competition, they could keep the prices high, and they'll be making massive amount of profits, right? So they start off by showing us how the combination started off in America. So we're going to continue from the industrial manager on the next read, right? So guys, thanks you for your time and your patience. Alright, remember, strength in body, powers in mind. Stay up.